and have them on my shelf, but really I get my inspiration from other places, and then I put them in my notebook, and then I go find the materials to build whatever it is that I've drawn in my notebook. So it's fairly planned out, which is, it causes some problems for me as a steampunk. Dave Lee, who's not here, is a master of cobbling together things that he finds and making them fit together in interesting ways. I'm kind of the opposite. I have to kind of plan out a design, and then I go hitting every flea market until I find that exact candlestick that I want to find, to fit into my part. So it's rewarding, but at the same time, it's time consuming. So this was my notebook of when I was first working on the backpack for my Arctic Explorer character, and so I wanted kind of a steam engine or steam boiler on the back. So there's a coal box at the bottom and a steam boiler on the left, and another tank in the middle, because I wanted to be able to have this steam pack run hoses into my clothing so that I could keep warm while I was exploring the Arctic, was the concept behind it. And then on the far right is my coffee mug, because you have to have something to keep you warm while you're traipsing around the Arctic. Synchro rotary spark gap generators. So those are real things if you go want to look them up. So it's about 3 feet long, I would say. Let me see if I hope I've got a thing here of me actually spinning it. So you see the lights kind of lighting up there.
Has that POV effect?
A little bit, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. So next up. Okay, so this is sort of jumping to the end almost, even though this was the next thing that I made. When I got into steampunk, I was kind of exploring two different threads of my muse at the time. One was I'd seen some steampunk costumers at DragonCon and thought that looked like a really cool thing to do, even though I didn't know how to do it or make costumes at the time. The second thing was I just kind of on a whim one day started thinking, well, I wonder, I was thinking about automatons, so antique robots. And I was kind of wondering how far had the technology of automatons sort of advanced in the Victorian era. And so I went on YouTube and I started doing some searching around and found a video for an automaton that's in the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia called the Maillard automaton.
Seen that one.
Yeah, and if you've ever seen the movie Hugo, Hugo the book was inspired by that automaton. And so the automaton is in the shape of a small boy sitting at a table, and the automaton can write poems in 2 languages, I believe, and then draw 4 different pictures. He draws a picture of a pagoda and a picture of a sailing ship, and I forget what the other pictures, maybe it's 2 pictures, I get the numbers mixed up, but, and then he can write, as I said, these poems in 2 different languages, and this isn't like little hand scratch, this is, cursive writing and drawing better than most people can do, and one of the drawings has, by Maillard as written out, and that's a plot point in the movie that the automaton writes out the name of its maker. And so that was kind of the pinnacle of automaton achievement. So I said, well, okay, I have no idea how to build that, but if I could ever build something like that, that would be really cool. And there was also a modern automaton artist named Thomas Kuntz that made this amazing clockwork sorcerer's tower with an animated sorcerer in it that inspired me as well. And so I said, I want to build an automaton. It was the time I was getting into steampunk. And so I had this project that I had started I was thinking I was going to build a weather station. And the idea was that it was an antique weather station, and that there would be a map associated with it, or a globe that you could like plug, like remember the old telephone switchboards where they plug the different wires in? So the idea would be you would plug in wires into locations on the map or on the globe, and then a little readout, an analog readout would show you what the temperature was, and then behind the scenes I would have it connected to the internet to like pull the weather down, but it would look like you were using a completely mechanical device.
Like a patch pad. Like a
Yeah, exactly. And so that was the concept. And so you can see kind of on the left was what the idea behind the globe and the base, and then I said, a lot of my ideas start with a kind of a small kernel, and then as I do more research and I start to think about it more, I get bigger and bigger and bigger until I get, so big that I'll never finish it, but I at least can get started in that direction. And so I'm like, okay, well, I've got this cool idea for a weather station, but what if I added my automaton into the weather station and made it a weather-telling automaton? And so I started coming up with this idea of the etherologist is an automaton that studies the ether. Now the ether was what the sort of pre-Victorians and up into the Victorian era, what they thought surrounded the earth that light traveled through. It was this made-up substance that they thought was the medium that electromagnetic waves could travel through. And so my concept was that this globe would contain the ether, but it was dangerous and too complex for people to analyze the ether, so they needed an automaton that could analyze the ether for you and tell you what it saw around the globe, happening around the globe. So that's the kind of the picture of the automaton there on the right, and then again it was a little bit inspired by the My Art Day automaton, a little bit inspired by Metropolis, the movie Metropolis. So it's got an Art Deco aesthetic more than kind of a steampunk aesthetic. And then here's some more diagrams of it as I was trying to figure things out, and the machinery for moving the automaton. And then I moved from here into Corel Draw. It's the vector illustrating program that I use to draw out a lot of my pieces when I need to know precise measurements and things. I'd just gotten into working at a tech shop where they had a laser cutter available. And so I knew I wanted to use the laser cutter for cutting the gears and cutting the boxes and things. And so moving into Corel Draw allowed me to then take the designs and run them through the laser cutter. That was an interesting challenge. One of the things I learned about that is that a laser cutter is very precise. It can measure and cut down to the thousandth of an inch as far as how accurate it is. Everything else I was building this thing with was not precise. I was using crude hand tools and my limited skills as a woodworker and metalworker, and I found that mixing those two different environments didn't work so well, right? Every time I tried to put things together with the laser, which were perfectly so, they wouldn't line up with the thing that I had kind of hacked with my hand tools, and so that was a bit of a challenge. Was kind of combining those two different environments. So this is the final piece, and the way he works. This is an antique radio from the 1930s inside him that is functioning. It's an AM radio, and you can push. There's a button here to the left on the top of that. You can push the button and ask him the weather anywhere in the world. Say, what's the temperature in England? And then he will turn his head and he rotates his arm, and that spins that ring around the globe. And he will look into the globe, and then he will say through the radio, it's 25 degrees in London, England. And if you look in that tube on the upper left, that's called an ethoscope, and it goes through a prism and looks into the globe. And when you look through there, you will see images and video playing from around the world. So that's the effect, and it's a very nice effect. When I would take it around and demonstrate it to people, and I'll show you a video here of what it looks like. So here's some close-ups of it. It's a mixture of found parts and things I created from scratch. That's an antique magnifying glass, an antique, kind of like a Mardi Gras mask that I got from India. His chest piece is called a Luxford glass. They were designed by Frank Lloyd Wright for bringing light into shops in the 1920s and 30s. He has salt and pepper shakers for ears. Let me just tell a quick story about the globe here, because this was another one of the things that I learned from this thing. That globe is just a glass globe, frosted glass globe that I painted with gold paint, painted the continents on with gold paint. What I originally had there was a plasma globe, like this. And it was a full-size plasma globe, and the glass was blown in the shape of the Earth. So all the continents were raised on it, and it was blue and green, and it was absolutely gorgeous, and I loved it. It was kind of my favorite piece of the whole thing. And one day I was working on him, and so he's got traditional gears that drive him, but there's an Arduino microcontroller that tells the motor to turn on and off. And so that computer setup is in his chest, and the motors and things that run the gears on the globe that spin around are in a separate piece in the base. And the programs were not doing what I had hoped they would do. It was supposed to be turning around, and for some reason they would go backwards, or they would not go at the right speed, and it was just behaving very strangely. And I'm like, okay, I'm new to programming an Arduino microcontroller, maybe I've got something wrong in the software, and I could not figure it out. And so finally I said, okay, well, I'm just going to keep eliminating parts until I can get this right. And so I put the automaton on one side of the table, and I put the base with the globe on the other side of the table. And as I'm working over here, working on the base, the automaton starts to move. And he's just like spinning his head and twisting his arm around, and there is no control cable connecting to the automaton. He's doing it completely on his own. And it was a very ghost in the machine moment. This is how I found out that plasma globes give off electromagnetic radiation out to about 1.5 feet. What happened was that globe had EMF waves that were radiating out and activating the microcontroller in the robot that was about 1.5 feet away and causing it to animate. So, unfortunately, the only way to fix that is to shield it. And you can do it with lead, or you can do it with a Faraday cage, which is just a metal cage around it. Unfortunately, I was too far along in the design at that point to add in any kind of a wall between, where the controller was and where this globe was. And so, unfortunately, I had to take that globe out and replace it with this globe, and I put a color-changing LED in it instead. So, I don't like it as much, but it at least functions now. Yes. I don't know if you can hear the voiceover. So were you able to see the children flipping over each other and reciting the scope? So you can't hear, but she said, what's the temperature in London? And he's responding, it's 25 degrees. And so, I don't know how well you can hear this, but there's a voiceover that plays through the radio while it's just sitting there moving. A friend of mine who's a voice actor from England did the voiceover. The idea was that this would be kind of a demonstration prop. You'd see it like a World's Fair. And that in the future, everybody would have one of these ether stations in their home, and you would not only be able to see the weather, but you'd be able to communicate through the ether using these same technologies, was the concept.